Hello?
Okay, sorry about that, guys. So we could start now. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of our youth dialogue. I mean, the last one we had was really amazing, and this time around, we were looking to make this one just as successful. So, our topic for today is recent class in 2020, and this will be from a Caribbean perspective and coming from young persons like myself. And today we have a very interesting panel, and they are Benedict Bryan, who is a human rights and development advocate who has over 10 years experience in community development, work and volunteering. He holds a BSc in political science and a postgraduate diploma in international relations. He served as a student ambassador for the University of the West Indies for 4 years and later founded the Youth-led Humanitarian Association of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, HARTT. During his time with the organization, he worked with the UE and other NGOs to implement the country's first integrated English classes for refugees and asylum seekers. He is currently providing programmatic support to UNHCR, implementing partner Living Water community to build resilience and promote integration amongst the host refugee, and migrant community in Trinidad and Tobago. During the Venezuelan crisis, Benedict continues to advocate for various human rights as part of the Youth Advisory Group for the Trinidad and Tobago United Nations Population Fund, advocating for healthy sexual practices and access, as well as providing support to the Queen's Commonwealth Trust. Our second panelist, we have Nicholas Jeffrey, who is the resident research officer at Intersect in Antigua and Barbuda and a graduate of the University of the West Indies. With our third panelist, we have Naya Brathwaite, who is an emerging human rights advocate whose most recent role was a legal and policy officer of Barbados Gays, Lesbian, and All Sexual Against Discrimination. Naya has advocated for social justice since her early childhood, but gained formal experience in advocacy as an undergraduate. And our third panelist, we have Saffiyah Acosta, who is a young queer community organizer, an activist based in Trinidad and Tobago. She currently serves as the community outreach officer for Womantra, a young feminist-led organization that focuses on gender, justice, and women's issues. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Randall Theodule, the Communication and Membership Officer for the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality, sorry. And I will be your moderator for this afternoon. So first we will go with Benedict Bryan, who will let us know a bit more about himself and shed some light on today's topic.
All right. So just an update. I know I sent that by you, but I recently switched jobs, but I'm still working with Living Water, providing some programmatic support where they need, but I'm not primarily there anymore. But I mean, today's topic is an interesting one, and I'm really glad that you took it as race and class, because I think it's something, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, that we haven't necessarily touched on too much. We've looked at the race aspect of it, but we didn't necessarily focus on the connecting relationship between both race and class, especially in the Caribbean, and given like a Caribbean context. So that was just me. I don't know if anybody else want to share their thoughts on today's topics or, like.
Nicholas, you could go ahead. We'll just go in that order. Yeah.
Hi. All right. My name is Nicholas Jeffrey. I am a graduate of the University of West Indies with a bachelor's in psychology. I'm the researcher for the Intersect, which is a Caribbean feminist activist organization that seeks to bring together Caribbean and Caribbean feminists through art, storytelling, and the like, to bring gender justice and advocacy around the Caribbean.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, Naya, you could jump in now and tell us a little bit more about yourself and some thoughts on the topic.
Well, sure. I just want to confess that. Well, thanks for having me first of all. But I am kind of new to structured activism. I only joined Be Glad in April last year, and then I took study break in September. So I'm kind of in between things. But I really wanted to be part of this discussion. And I guess my initial thoughts on the topic are that race and class are so interconnected in the Caribbean, and they play such a big role. But at the same time, it's almost normalized, so people don't see the problem with it oftentimes. So I guess those are just my first thoughts on the topic.
Okay, and Saffiyah, is she there? Yes. Saffiyah, if you could hear me, you could probably jump in now. If you're speaking, your mic is off, so we're not hearing. Okay. Let me see if I could get her. Saffiyah? Okay, I guess she will. Okay, she jumped off, so hopefully she will come back on. Okay, so I mean, across the islands, generations, we all have witnessed the impact of racism on the Black community worldwide. And from our perspective, as Caribbean natives, more so third world countries, um, more recently, young people in the region, have been witnessing the tumult of surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement around the world. So today, I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have that conversation at ECADE with young people from the Caribbean to hear your views and what you have to say on the issue. I think the issue is more than just normal us on our normal day living. We have Black trans people right now who are still being murdered and nothing is being done about it. Um, I think it's something that, and I mean, when we speak about race and class and we speak about the Black community, we tend to forget about the Black people within the LGBTQ community because they're already marginalized young people. So then they're like, okay, we see you as just being part of the community, but you're not Black. So we're going to just get rid of you and do whatever we want. So, and like I've been saying, all Black lives won't matter until Black LGBTQ lives matter. So I think with that, I'm just probably might just ask the first question to start off the conversation. Um, how do you, as young Caribbean activists or young Caribbean advocates, see? I mean, what is happening worldwide? How could you more so do something within your specific country or your space or around the region to see something better happen for Black people? Do you think that we in the Caribbean have a race and class issue as Black people?
All
So if
right. Well,
you could
yeah,
jump in.
I don't mind. I don't mind going first. Oh, Saffiyah is back, I think. I
Hi.
just saw her pop back
Yeah,
on.
she's
Yeah.
there.
I have the voice.
So
Um, that my video. Oh, I might be able to. Okay, cool.
yeah,
Awesome.
I
Hello, everybody. All your beautiful.
so
I missed.
we oh sorry I didn't. So before we go into the conversation, I mean, let's just have you introduce yourself to the viewers and let them know some more about yourself and the work that you do.
So my name is Saffiyah Acosta. I live where the internet does not work. I'm an activist and organizer with Womantra. It's a feminist organization based in Trinidad and Tobago. My pronouns are she, they. I identify as queer, and I'm the community outreach officer at the organization. I don't know if that was all we were supposed to say, just kind of.
Yeah, that is fine. So before you joined in, I was just speaking on, the Black Lives Matter movement and how, Black LGBTQ plus people are still being murdered and nothing is being done about it because they view LGBT people are just that marginalized group, and just for being that way and not bring them as normal human beings or being black. So and like I said, all Black lives won't matter until Black LGBTQ plus lives matter. So
Yeah.
the question was, what can we as young people in the Caribbean do, or how do you see, what can we implement to at least help speak on the issue? Or do you see that we have an issue in the Caribbean as a race and class issue in the Caribbean as Black people?
Mm. That's a really good question, but it's a deep question. I don't know if we'll be able to get through it in an hour and a half. We definitely have a race and class issue in the Caribbean. I mean, I don't want to say from inception because people have existed here before colonialism and enslavement, but it definitely has not let up. Um, in terms of the identity of queer people who are Black and who are marginalized, killed, harmed, disregarded, I think that is an important conversation for us to have. And I think that most people on this panel are definitely advocates um, in that sphere. Um, I mean, being queer and being Black is not something you can separate, right? So, in my activism, or I should say in our activism in the organization, we take an intersectional approach to our feminism. So, we aren't just thinking about women um, in this single minded way, which usually equates to white womanhood, right? We can't separate our Blackness from our femaleness or femininity, from our poorness or from our location of where we were birthed. So yeah, when we talk about these issues of Black Lives Matter, when we talk about queer issues, we always have to think about how do these identities intersect and overlap, and how can we best address them in that way. Yeah.
So I don't mind if I don't mind jumping in for 2 minutes. I like what you said, and it's something that I find very interesting. Now, personally, I think because of the topic that came up, I've been looking at particular topics around the issue. I haven't really spoken about it much. But in the Caribbean, we it's very unique in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement because we have predominantly Black countries, right? So how we perceive Black Lives Matter, what we look at as systemic injustice is not going to be the same as what we have been seeing in the media. And I think for me, from how I view it, it's a lot more old systemic systems that have been put in place via colonialism that we are now working to undo. Because when we do look at those structures and we look at who are the leaders of those structures, who are on top of those structures, as sad as it may seem, you could still be in a predominantly Black country, and the person that sits at the top of those structures is a white or close to white or light brown man. It's it's seldom what you would expect the rest of the population to look like. But something that I did want to talk about a few years ago was the class difference. And I know I don't want to deviate from the topic too much, but the class difference in the LGBT community, because what I have seen and noticed, and it's something that I did want to write about once upon a time, but it was too much to get into, is the class difference between LGBT people in the Caribbean and human rights. Because while we do look at it, and I love what Randall said in terms of, Black Lives Matter, but queer lives also matter. But when you look at the class difference there, for me, you could literally see some people are afforded human rights in a system that may not afford everyone human rights. And if you do not have the socioeconomic background, your experience as an LGBT person within that is completely different. So you could then be, you could be a light skinned, close to white person in a particular socioeconomic background, and your experience in the same country be 100% different. And it's something. So I'm glad the conversation is kind of veering in that direction, because it's not something a lot of people speak to or address addressed because it is glaring. The more you look at these circles and see who is actually being afforded human rights and who has access, you then see the difference. I don't know what other people use, the people on the panel.
I actually had some thoughts about that. Those are two very interesting contributions because it's exactly what I kind of want to talk about. So two aspects. The first one was about how classism, racism, and homophobia all stem from the same thing, which are these like discriminatory colonial structures. And I think that what we can do as young people is to kind of coalition build because there are groups, you know, there are, for instance, in Barbados, there are Rastas, people with disabilities. We all face very similar structural issues and actually be glad that a policy paper on that, on how various groups face very similar obstacles to progress. And you would not think that it's not natural to think about, perhaps, to think about coalition building with, for instance, Rastas because of the very homophobic perception that we may have of them. But actually, that's something that we have been doing, trying to build unusual coalitions. That's one thing we could do because it's all from the same root problem. And the second thing is actually something personal to me, which is the relationship between class and homophobia. Because for me personally, I can say that I do have a privileged background. My experience of homophobia has been completely different to my friends. And I know it's because class has shielded me from some of the more grim realities of homophobia. And personally, I would like to use that privilege to do something useful with it to help other people. But I think that is a conversation that needs to be had because, for example, just to give you a brief example of how I've seen this play out in Barbados, there was a recent conversation about the Welcome Stamp program in Barbados. So as some of you may know, Barbados opened up, said that it's going to welcome visitors for up to 12 months. And initially, the definition of spouse was man and woman. There was a big outcry. The Prime Minister said, we welcome all, and within like 24 hours, it was changed. And it was interesting to see the responses of different classes of people within the community. So for instance, you probably know of Peter Wickham. He's a very prominent political scientist, but his response was very different from, say, Alexa Hoffman, who's a trans activist. His response was that it's great, they recognize their relationships like mine, because he's married. He's saying they recognize the relationships like mine, that's very good, a very progressive step of the government. But then Alexa Hoffman, for instance, her response was completely different. She was like, no, how can you possibly allow tourists or visitors to have their existence and relationships recognized before people who live, work, and contribute to Barbados? And obviously, the people who are going to come to Barbados on this Welcome Stamp program, they're going to be predominantly white, predominantly wealthy, because the Welcome Stamp, I checked, the visa is very expensive. So predominantly white and wealthy, having this recognition and rights that the indigenous Barbadian does not have. So it is quite interesting, actually, the relationship between class and homophobia in Barbados, particularly.
I would have to agree with what everyone is saying. Well, and I think Ben spoke about it a lot when he said about the classism issue within the LGBTQ community. And I mean, it's something that I witness, I see it all the time. So if you're not dressing a specific way, or if you don't have a specific standard, or you don't look a certain way, then, you know, like, okay, you could get discriminated against and stuff like that. And those who, you know, look like they come from a good socioeconomic background, they would get the easy drive-throughs, like they could just walk and nothing would happen to them. And I think that's something that happens in literally all Caribbean countries, I should say, and it happens all the time. And I'm not sure if Nicholas has anything to say on that.
Yes, I do. I just like to mention, I agree with all the points that have been raised so far, right? I also mention, I agree with how gender, race, and class all intersect. That was Saffiyah was speaking about. I also like to mention what we can do to improve on these issues in the Caribbean, right? So as young people, as people in organizations that are activists that want to bring about, spur social change, I think what we should be doing, right, we need to be directing the discussions and starting discussions with government officials, with policymakers, so that these issues can be resolved, so that they can recognize where within their society, within their institutions, within their systems, where these issues arise from. So within like race and class, in our schools, we see that there are a lot of anti-black policies that regarding hair, dress, things like that, that we need to tackle as a society, as a current society together, so that we can tackle issues like colorism and change sorry, change colorism and improve on that so that future generations don't have to have these issues or have these experience these issues at least at a lesser degree.
I would have to agree. And I mean, if and you spoke about the whole hair issue and stuff, and I mean, just recently there was this whole issue in Jamaica with this 7-year-old girl. So I guess it's something that happens in a country like Jamaica where they use Bob Marley, to promote the country for tourism and stuff, and then you're denying a young girl who has lost access to education. I think that is something. I mean, I'm not sure if it doesn't only happen in Jamaica. It's
It
something that
definitely
we're
doesn't really
seeing
happen in
happen
Jamaica.
around the region. So these are the things, and I mean, I agree with you on speaking with the policymakers, the government officials. But most time, you go in there, you see it, you have a conversation, they all agree to what you're saying. Then you follow up and like, did I just giving you the side eye or not even really taking you on? So it's like, what can we do? We have the meeting with you. What can we do now? If you agree to it, we have to hold you to your word. And if you don't, then what's that action? So I think when we think of that, we have to move from, we move from the rhetoric and we go to action. We sit down, we have meetings with you, listen to us, you agree. Then if you don't want to follow up on any of the things that you agreed upon, then I guess we could just stick into action, go on the streets to a protest, do something and make you listen like, okay, hey, you agreed to do this, you agreed to do that. Now you're not doing it, here's what's going to happen. And I mean, it's something that happens within the Caribbean region. Government officials agree to certain things, and in the next 5 years, 4 or 5 years, elections coming, then they would rush to come and do stuff. So we waited so long before you actually do something for us, and now that election is coming, you want to rush. So what is it that we now could do to prevent these things from happening in the future?
I, if I can make a point, I would like to say that in addition to getting policymakers to agree to changing laws and enact policies that would benefit queer people, women, everyone across the Caribbean, I think it's up to us to also try to spur change within the ideals of Caribbean citizens. So, if example, like take example, there's so many laws in the Caribbean that are not enforced, but since they are there, a lot of people have the idea that these things are wrong in the first place, and even if they were removed, these people will still have the idea that these things are wrong. It's about changing the ideologies of these persons. For example, in Intersect, we have started a Caribbean feminist stories project since we believe that through art, through media, we can transform people's ideals and enact social justice and social change. The things that I believe would be able to help the individuals around the Caribbean also change their attitudes towards certain topics like LGBTQ rights, abortion, etc.
Yeah, well, oh, I don't know if I could jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, so I 100% agree with you, but I really liked the initiative that Nia spoke to in terms of meeting communities and having that discussion because one of the things, even because I don't want to veer too far away from policy, but one of the things that I think really does a lot of work, and for me, again, just bringing it back home, just driving home the point is having these conversations within these spaces. And I love the idea of having those difficult conversations with persons who or groups that may be perceived as being homophobic, but then I think, Nia, for me, what I would love to hear from is how do you then gauge that or start that interaction? Because I think it's something everybody could benefit from. Because, you know, you want to start, those are the groups you want to start reaching and having those kind of conversations with, because it actually does make a lot of sense. We have a system where a group of people are already disadvantaged, and then within that group, you have other segmented groups. So I don't know if you could share like how it is you guys approach it in terms of speaking to rosters in your country and just the process around it, because I know like just accessing the gatekeepers, like if you could just give me like a brief of how it is you approach it.
All right, no problem. So what we had something, well, we still have something called the One Barbados Initiative. So it is, well, what the first thing we did was have invite different leaders, different groups. All of them didn't come, so we invited Rastas, people from our elderly, people with disabilities, youth, women, etc. We invited them to have a conversation about how the change in the economy, and because, as you know, Barbados went through a very difficult, or is still going through a very difficult economic time. So we invited them to discuss how they were being personally impacted by these economic issues, and like through the discussions, because it was not about LGBT anything, it was just about how are you being, how is this affecting you? It was a very kind of neutral, you know, conversation that we had, and out of that we realized that actually we are facing very similar barriers. And I think that once they understood, once they saw our humanity and we saw theirs, and we understood that actually we're fighting the same structure, it then became easier to have more intense conversations. And actually, I think something that is important is also to stand up for them too, because when they have issues with police harassment, or we're trying to get the legalization of ganja for religious use, we also need to support them as well. So I think that if we support their initiatives, they're going to be more likely to support ours. And if there is like this kind of solidarity building amongst communities, we're much stronger together than we are separated, because they're going to try to separate us and try to pit groups against each other. We know that. And I'm seeing some, just to go on another topic, I'm seeing some questions in the chat, apparently from YouTube, about the bill that I was talking about. So just to briefly talk about that, there is the remote working bill, which talked about the welcome stamp, and the definition is spouse changed from man or woman to just partner, which was a gender neutral term. And that was what caused a lot of uproar in Barbados. And then we had a subsequent discussion on a bill, prevention and discrimination bill, which I can talk about a bit later. But then that bill protected people for the first time on the basis of sexual orientation and also domestic partnership status, which is gender neutral also. But that is in employment only, it's not in society. So there's still no protection of LGBT relationships outside of prevention of discrimination based on partnership status. So that was the question. But did that answer, did my first part answer your question, Benedict?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you guys very much. And I mean, I have, since we have no more questions in the chat, I could probably just jump in and ask that question. Do you think class has contributed to shaping, you know, the shaping of the Caribbean history? That is.
I would like to answer that. And yes, I agree. I would say yes, class, much like race, has shaped our Caribbean society. Class informs who can go to the best schools, who can get adequate medical treatment, who can even participate in the everyday lives of everyday activities of the Caribbean. Like, for example, with regarding that point, it's some countries have stipulations on who can go to the beach, who can go to the beaches, for free, right? I mean, some countries have prices attached to going to the beach, unlike other countries, and that is a clear evidence as to how certain classes can access the everyday parts of the Caribbean life. But the thing is that isn't just in those countries. I think that's an issue in all of our Caribbean countries. Antigua has laws that prevent stuff like that from happening, but it doesn't prevent people from trying. People would often put up blockades on their beaches, on their quote unquote beaches, to prevent regular citizens from enjoying it. And so that's how. So I think class has informed our society. And with class, I do want to mention that we have to include gender in our discussions when talking about class, as gender inequality is rampant across the Caribbean. Thank you.
It is. It is. I'm not sure if any one
I
of the
wanted to just
panelists want to jump on that as well.
sure. Um, I thought we had a speaking order, so I kind of fell out. I wanted to respond a little bit to Nicholas's comments, just to elaborate a little bit. So, what we understand about class is that it's respectability, right? So the reason why in Jamaica they would have essentially banned free-form locks is because it doesn't look neat enough, you know. So class is definitely your income bracket, where you were, who you were born um, out of, and where, and all these different things. But it's also just these ways that we think about things, the aspirations that we have as working class people to aspire to be middle class or upper class, so, or you know, just to live well. And I mean, that's not wrong to want to live well, but because we live in such a tightly structured system, we it's very difficult to imagine how we can achieve a good life without, you know, being willing to step on the next person to get a position up. Um, and like you said, it's not having access to a lot of things. It's also, well, I wanted to talk a little bit about GBV because the way that a dark-skinned Black woman experiences violence in her community or just anywhere existing in the world is going to be different from how a woman of another race or another gender identity experiences violence, right? So yeah, just to kind of break down what classes, not necessarily in these ways of like having money, but also in the ways that we think, who speaks properly and who went to what prestige school, and you know, all these different things also builds up to form this class structure that, you know, puts us on these tiers, and puts Black folks, Black women, Black queer people at the bottom.
And so far, I like the fact that you brought up where you're from and where you were born and the people you were born from, I guess. I think these,
Generational wealth is probably one of the greatest factors in terms of how you establish, you know, how you live and how you eat for generations, you know. So
yes.
yeah.
And I think I like that because recently, I mean, I've been following up what's happening in Trinidad, right? You know, with the police and the people from that specific community. So I'm not sure if probably you or Ben would probably just want to touch upon it for like a minute or two. And like, because my opinion from what I've been reading and seeing is like, it's one of those like underprivileged communities in Trinidad where police officers feel like, you know, they could just going and do what they want with the citizens because you're not obeying the law and stuff like that. So if any one of you could just jump on and speak on it for a while.
I'll start, and Benedict, you could join in with whatever I
Sure thing.
perspective. So just to give folks who are watching a little debrief, because I don't want to rely on the stories portrayed by the media. I have firsthand experience that they just have their own narrative and want to create a story that isn't necessarily connected to the truth. So Trinidad and Tobago joined in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement after the death of, it's a shame I can't. Thank you so much, George Floyd. Breonna Taylor and a lot of others, but mostly it was George Floyd that was the rallying cry, right? So we decided to protest well, some folks decided to protest outside the US Embassy. This would have been on the lawn of the Queen's Park Savannah, and essentially called for justice. So Womantra saw that this was happening. We got involved. We decided that we wanted to contribute an aspect to to the protest. So we collected all the names of men and women, people who had been killed over the past. I think we started from 2017 up to 2019, who'd been killed by the police. And so we called out those names. I believe it was 23 names. Um, at the protest, and we called for justice for them as well. So when people talk about, the Caribbean is just adopting these American ideals, it's like, well, maybe you could say that, but also we have very similar parallels, in terms of issues and police violence that we face. So after that incident, a lot of the media coverage was focused around um, white ambassadors and what they had to say, and what was their thought process. And also an incident that happened at an hours-long protest involving a white passing man and a police officer. So the narrative was steered in a particular direction that distracted from the issue and actually the beauty of what happened on that lawn. Um, Slightly after, the nation called and said, we don't have problems here with race. We all Black. All police officers are Black. So, we don't have this problem. And then 3 men are killed in Mova, which is a historically underserved Black community, Afro-Chinese. Um, and following the death of these 3 men, a video was released where people were able to see that they had their hands up when the police killed them. So the community responded and they started burning tires, they were in the streets, they were reasonably upset, like if your community members are constantly being targeted and killed, you will have some kind of emotional response. And so the police came in, they beat people and chased them back to their homes. The police commissioner put out a statement essentially saying that these protests weren't organic, that came out of righteous anger, but instead it was some plot by criminal elements to misdirect the country into chaos. So it was a lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation going around. And in the midst of it all, these 3 men were murdered. They no longer live, they no longer exist on this plane. And their communities, their families are still hurting. We haven't had justice. The police complaints authority made recommendations to the police commissioner to say that the officers involved in the shooting should be immediately, I think it was suspended. I'm not sure without pay or with pay. And the police commissioner, as far as I know, has not conceded to the police complaints authority, which is supposed to be the accountability for the police. So I rambled for a bit there. I don't know if I covered everything, but yeah, that's essentially what happened here. Also, I want to make mention that during the protest for the 3 men that were killed in Mova, a woman was murdered. She was killed by the police at a protest, and she was pregnant, so she and her unborn child was killed. Sorry to leave it on on that note.
So I'm just gonna jump in after Saffiyah, right? I'm just gonna jump in after Saffiyah, because what we see, especially in Trinidad, because I don't necessarily want, of course, the situation that happened that she just described is very complex in itself, right? Because there are a lot of factors and elements at play, but what we do see, and if you look at it, it's a clear issue with class. We do have especially in Trinidad when it comes to, and it's so, because it's so close and it's so intertwined, we don't necessarily see the problem that emerges with our class problem, because our class problem is linked to colonialism. So if you think about the colonial system that existed before, you just have one group of people replacing the other, and then the norms and values that, of course, will perpetuated or maintained by that group, one group is going to adopt, and anybody that deviates from that is going to be seen as either lower or lesser class. So, I mean, you have people, and apart from the situation that happened in Beatum, you do have scholars that come out of particular areas, but they do face a particular unique challenge with saying, okay, I grew up in Beaton, because you can't say that, because then the stigma or judgment that comes with it, of course, negates any possibility or any opportunity that's going to come out in the future. So for us, I mean, if you're sitting in a particular part of Trinidad, you are shielded from a lot of things, and if you aren't, you are also exposed to a lot of things, and you don't get particular opportunities. So we will say we don't have a race problem, but our race problem is so closely linked to class that we don't see it. So even, and when I say class, you have to think about what does that class look like, what are the norms, and then where do these norms originate from, what do they look like. So do they mimic those in the US? Do they mimic the norms in the UK? And then what makes those norms suitable and appropriate? So, not understanding, okay, we're in a Caribbean context. How do we as Caribbean people move and operate? Is just adopting one norm and putting it here. And if you don't ascribe to that, or and ascribing to that, maybe how you look, as you said, how you talk, what school you went to, that will then play into what particular class in society you are. So I mean, the situation in Trinidad is very, very complex, and especially when we're talking about race. Like there was a video of a woman, and I think she's in the government. I don't know if you saw it, Saffiyah, where she went on a rant, and she was talking about people, and when they have a particular type of behavior, this is why policemen would beat them because they behave a particular type of way. And in my head, I'm like, okay, you can't say that. You can't just lump a group of people together and say, because you behave a particular type of way, that means you deserve this. And again, she then reinforced herself with that statement by saying, if you look at her, she's of a particular type of class. I was like, there is a problem. You yourself can't see that your issue with class is then linked to racism because you're categorizing a group of people that look and act a particular way to be less than. So I mean, it's a complex, especially and I think in the region, it's something that we really would need some time to pull apart, because when we do think of class and racism, I don't know how many people are willing to admit that, yeah, there is some prejudice and judgment there. If you are in a carnival, perfect example, a group of, I was somewhere, I was with a group of people, and another group of people were walking down the street, predominantly black. And the instant reaction was to lock the door. And I'm like, what's that? Why are you going to lock the door? And they're like, no, well, just in case it's like a big group. I'm like, so what if it's a big group? If it was a big group of white people, you'd lock the door. So, it's those kind of things that we don't necessarily think about, but are knee-jerk reactions because of our perceptions around class, race, and what that looks like, and then norms and values. So I think in the region itself, I know Trinidad especially, we have a particular, we have some things to look into. I can't speak to the other countries in the region, but I know it's something that is closely linked together, race and class, and that divide and how we perceive it. I have to admit, sometimes I have to catch myself and be like, no, that is not the narrative or story that you should be saying or thinking about. So I don't know how it is in Barbados or Antigua and Barbuda. If you guys wanna share that, give me some insights.
I want to let everybody get a chance, but just really quickly, as you were talking about basically the justification for murder, right? Because this is something that is said a lot when someone is killed by the police and the family is in the street crying and saying, my family's dead, and people online, people who have no emotional connection to this person who lives in a community that they don't identify with, would say very callously, well, the Muzzy was in crime, or look how we looking, or this kind of way to justify the murder. And it is so parallel to how violence against queer people or LGBT people is justified in the same way. Like that to me, I mean, I, I think that in a way, queer people have this kind of superpower because we have this super sensitivity to the injustices of the world, right? Especially if you're also Black. But yeah, I just wanted to point out that parallel of justification of harm with gender and with race.
Yeah.
Right, Saffiyah, I agree totally where the issues that LGBTQ plus persons face are very much similar to the issues that Black people face, that women face in our society. And Benedict kind of talked on it, but I would like to mention that race and class and gender cannot necessarily be separated. It's They're all interconnected. They all inform each other, right? Black people, we may not, in our Caribbean society, may not experience direct racism, but we do experience colorism, which is the residue of white supremacy. Right? These are residues from our colonial past. These are residues that period of time where white people were on top and Black people were nothing. And we have replicated that with colorism. So lighter skinned folk gets better privileges and protections than darker skinned folks. So that's why a lot of people think that Black people who behave bad deserve to get shot by the police, deserve the death. That's what we deserve. Right? And we have to work on these issues. That's what we have to work on these mentalities, make you realize that, okay, this is why I think like this, and this is how I can improve on these thoughts, improve on my preferences, improve on why I think lighter skinned folks are pretty, why I think blonde, smooth hair is wonderful, blue eyes, any eye color that is not brown as attractive. These are issues that we have to face. And even with Carnival, as Benedict mentioned, where Carnival is our celebration of freedom, celebrating freedom from slavery, and we replicate colorism and racism in our Carnival promotions, who are the promo girls, who are on the trucks dancing, who gets the most visibility at Carnival. Right? We replicate these power structures in our everyday lives, in our celebrations. So we need to work on that as a Caribbean nation. Every single one of our nations in the Caribbean suffers from colorism. Every single one. There's not one of them that does not have that issue. And I can say that with a certainty. I know that person for a fact. Yes. So that's what I have to say on that.
I could just jump in here. I think that a few things stood out to me. One was what I would call respectability politics. So I think that that's a big issue in the Caribbean. We have this issue with somebody who is, well-mannered and quiet and polite and fits all these ideals. I don't know what ideals they are, but fits particular ideals. And they're allowed more space in a lot of the in a lot of our society. So I think that, for instance, let me give you a concrete example. So in Barbados, in about 2008, there was a police encounter between this Rasta man and between the Rasta man and the police, and it was very suspicious. So his name was Ayakobi Loli, and I think that he got all of the visibility that he got in Barbados because he fit the mold respectability, because he was Rasta, yes, but he was also a scholar. He was very prominent in the community. He was at the UE. He was doing very well. So people saw him as the exception to the rule, and I don't think that was fair. So what happened was that he was apparently on a cliff, and the police claimed, they said it was a drug bust. The police claimed he jumped off of the cliff and landed face down, but yet he had all kinds of marks behind and injuries behind his head. And they said he jumped in with his haversack, but his bag, there was no water damage to the bag. Then they took very long to write a report. So it's very suspicious. And I would say that's an instance of police brutality, because up to now, we don't exactly know what happened. But I think, and actually, just to give you some context, his death really sparked a lot of conversations in Barbados back in 2008 about police brutality and about race. I think because he was respectable, quote unquote, and I think that's something we need to really consider, because just because somebody doesn't fit your mold of respectability does not mean that they deserve violence, because we're all human beings and human beings deserve to be treated as humans, full stop. They could behave as badly as ever, but they should be treated proportionately and with humanity, and that's about it. And also another thing that we should be mindful of is language. So something I noticed in Barbados a lot, I'm not sure about the other countries, but when we're speaking about white people, you would hear white lady and white gentleman. When you're speaking about black people, you hear the black woman, that black man, that fella. But there's very specific language they used to talk about different races, and it's something that I noticed in my own family. Like you would hear something about good hair, and I'm like, so what hair is good? They're like, that hair. I'm like, but is it better than my hair, or is it better than your hair? No, it's not. What's good hair? What good eyes? What's this white lady, black man thing? I don't understand that. I think we need to be mindful of how because our language, it tells us exactly how we think about what we experience, and so I think language is something we need to think about. And what else? I just wanted to share that actually the hair problem is quite. It also exists in Barbados. Actually, my old secondary school, which is probably will be considered one of the prestigious secondary schools in Barbados, there was a whole conversation when I had graduated about natural hair, because this girl went to school with an afro, and she was told that she needed to plait it or put it in a different style. But I know that when I was at school, they had white girls with their hair flying with no scrunchie, no ruffle, and they were never told to put their hair in any style, any particular style. Their hair is open. Her hair was open in an afro. That's how their hair naturally sits. But yet she was the one who was the who was told that she had to make changes. And my school was not a predominantly white school. It was privileged and prestigious, yes, but it wasn't. It was a majority black school. But yeah, and actually the principal at the time was a black woman. But still, we had these issues with respectability again, with racism, with classism, and there are all these intersections, I think. And yeah, I think that was all I wanted to add for now.
I like those points you brought up, Nia. I agree totally. And from my experiences in being in Barbados, I can make the assumption, like you mentioned, that with education, with academia has a lot of elitism within it.
Yeah.
So we often get the idea that persons who are uneducated, who didn't go to university, are just a waste of time and do not need to be respected or cared about as much as persons who have been through academia. And respectability is often informed by colorism and those issues too. So they hear that is in Antigua as well. I went to a prestigious high school in Antigua, a grammar school, and one of our rules was that the boys could not grow hair at all. We had to have our hair really cut low. But as from my personal experiences, I've seen students from different races skirt past those rules a bit. If they were like white or Arabian, so from those places, they could grow their hair at a longer length than the rest of us, right? So I do think so, and I think professionalism and those issues are very rooted in anti-blackness. Very rooted. You see that from not just in schools, but in businesses. I can't think of which job interviews I've gone to, and one of the prerequisites would be to have to cut my hair, because my hair is not professional. Seen professional, and my friends, my girlfriends, often tell me that they'll have to perm their hair so that they can get whatever job or do not or won't face any punishments from their workplaces.
I mean, quite a few things you all said stood out to me. I mean, even here in St. Lucia, I mean, and that was only recently I found out when I was at one of the youth groups. I mean, they had a meeting, and majority of the girls in there went to, the top prestigious school, which is St. Joseph's Convention. I think most of us in the Caribbean country have that school. And they were speaking about the race issue at the school that they only realized after they left. And it has to do more, when you spoke about the hair issue and stuff. And I think that was one of the biggest issues that they had, because as black people, they couldn't have their hair, in these updos, or like just jump their hair. But then the children of a lighter skin complexion, or come from that specific background, they could come to school with their hair, laid on their back, or anyhow they feel comfortable with it. And they were saying that, all these 5 years they were at school, they never realized what was happening to them until after the fact. And I think the second thing that stood out, and I think I touched on it a bit earlier on, was where you come from as well. Um, I think, hey, there are specific communities in St. Lucia where, police would just go in and just try to do raids and try to go in this specific, and like, okay, that's the bad community, so they're doing all the bad stuff. And sometimes not even really them. Sometimes it's other people coming into the area, committing the crimes, and then going back. And I think if I could speak on the Black Lives Matter protests that they were planned here in St. Lucia, and it was happening, where, you know, police officers were given a sign, well, a warning to more or less arrest the people that's present at the event. I mean, it didn't happen, but if you really look at it, at the end of the day, it's like these same things happen to people here in St. Lucia. You have the young black men who go into prison and they never come out alive, or you'll let them go, but they never got home. So, like, what happened whilst they were in prison, or what happened when you let them go? Up to now, most of these cases have not been solved. No, family members are still looking for answers for their loved ones because they don't know. And people here fail to realize that it was like, oh, we're just black, we're black people, we're all black together, so we don't have a race issue, we don't have a class issue. But people don't realize. And I mean, recently, one of my coworkers, we were having a conversation, and she mentioned, there was this one quote unquote white vagrant. And he's not a St. Lucian, obviously. I think he was either from Canada or the US. And the government did all what they could to get him back to his country, give him FA, everything back to his country. And then you have your local citizens who are still on the streets, living day to day by begging people for stuff to eat, and you can't put anything in place to help these people. But you're going to help just this one white man, quote unquote, who's on the street and is begging. You don't want to see him, but you would see your black people doing the exact same thing. And I think that is something we fail to realize as people, because we're like, okay, from here to make them send him back to his country. But then you have the same black people, hey, help them too. And I think before I open to any questions from the viewers, I think I have one more question, which is, I mean, in your experience as activist, and your experience in activism, how do you think class and race affect Caribbean youth? And that's my final question before we open to the viewers.
Okay, so I have a mini rant that I'm going to go on. And this is in respect to activism. Now, Saffiyah, like you could tell me your perspective, but I have a mini rant here. So for me, in terms of class and race affecting activism, 100% yes. Yes, like hands down, especially, and I've seen it firsthand in Trinidad. Like, you see, if we check most NGOs that are doing well, that get a lot of the grants, that are getting funding, and you look who's leading the connections, they look a particular way, they come from a particular type of family. And if I'm being honest, you have to, and it's something I was talking to a few people about, just in terms of activism and getting into activism, you have to be able to afford it, because a lot of the times activism doesn't pay. You are going to be doing more work than anybody else in a corporate job, and it's not going to pay you well. So a lot of the NGOs that you would see pop up and thriving and then going to social entrepreneurship, a lot of them are from a particular class and look a particular way. It's a majority thing. And I could tell you firsthand, I started an NGO and I did the groundwork for years. And I would be seeing things happening, and then you're wondering, how do these people have access to these spaces? Because I don't have access to these spaces. I don't know anybody from this organization. How is this happening? And then you have to try to figure out, one, because you're not from that particular class, you don't have the connections. You now have to do twice the work to try to figure out how you're going to actually make that connection to get the work, at least get the resources that you need to get your job done. There is 100% sorry, an issue. And I like to the point where I don't know how to tell donors sometimes. You guys need to go to grassroots organizations. You guys need to stop just funding these big organizations that have years behind them. And then who are the people that are running these organizations? They don't look like the everyday man. Like, you need to tackle grassroots organizations. I've been pushing for it on the side with some groups, but yes, it is an issue. I personally find it's a big issue. Saffiyah, I don't know if your views are different, but I have been pressed about this thing.
I'm on the same page with you, Benedict. I mean, even just to register your NGO and stuff, there's certain guidelines that you need to follow. If you want to access certain resources, they require certain documents. And all of these are barriers, right? Because that is if you have money to print, that is if all your people have the right personal documentation in order to be registered on your board or whatever it is. I want to give an example. I don't want to give it no trouble, so I'm gonna just leave it at um, some NGOs have an established relationship with donors, and I mean, if you're a young person trying to start an NGO, that's hard. But also, if you're a young person trying to join an NGO that already exists, that already has their very archaic structures in place, and you're trying to challenge things like dress code or different things that youth that we care about, things that we I think that one of the gems of our generation is that we don't want to tolerate what doesn't feel right to us, right? A lot of our um, colleagues uh, want to work in a place that is rewarding, not just financially, like our parents would have. I mean, big up to the old people and them who would have buckle down and do what they needed to do in order to secure the funds, right? So that we could make that decision now and say, well, we ain't chasing the dollar, we chasing something greater, we chasing something more. I don't want to say long lasting because money does last real long, but you understand where I'm coming from. Um, but I'm trying to remember. Okay, so the question was race and class. I'm just gonna respond anyway. If it affects activism, 110%, right? Because even as Benedict was saying, if you live in a certain area and you have to put that address down on your documentation, that might be a slight against you. All these different things. So yeah, and I mean, you don't have that generation. I was talking earlier about generational wealth, but also I would say on par with that is the generational knowledge of how to maintain wealth, right? So if you don't have that foundation, even in your own personal life, and then you try to do activism work, which is very much unpaid, you will be there's no pension plan for activists. There's no structures in place that say, okay, this is a labor framework for people who are in activism to be able to retire, to live, to get health insurance, or all these different things. So like we just you know kind of free floating. And majority of the time, you find that people who do activism in this way are poor, black, and working class people, right? The more wealthier, whiter activists, I don't want to call them activists, but philanthropists, don't have to go through this. They don't have to hop this many um, turnstiles to get to where they need to go. You know. So, yeah.
Right. Saffiyah, I like the points you brought up a lot. And yes, race and class definitely affect our youth in the Caribbean. Definitely. As we've spoken before of how colorism and racism, white supremacy shows up in our laws and policies. These laws and policies then affect our youth and prevent or affect them negatively in the Caribbean. So as we see, and I was talking about Carnival, and who's seen predominantly on the ads and in the media, that if a little black girl or black boy sees that, they're like, oh, I'm not. Isn't for me. This isn't for me. This isn't for me. This is for somebody else, and that's not true. Carnival is for everybody. Right? School is for everybody. Health is for everybody. Food is for everybody. Right? And what Saffiyah is saying with pension plans and being unpaid as an activist, yes, this is why we need our our governments to enact more and more social safety nets, better safety nets for not just activists but for poor folks in general, right? Because in Antigua, women make up a large percentage of the poverty bracket, right? Because they're in jobs that don't pay well. They're in jobs in like the service industry. So they're maids, they're tailors, these things that don't have strong enough capital behind them so that they will retire and live in their old houses like other people might be able to. Young people as well also have to internalize all this information about who has nice hair and who has blue eyes and so on and so on. From my personal experiences in college, I've had countless discussions about how some people would like this nice muscled brown skinned boyfriend so that when they have babies, the babies will come up with nice eyes and nice hair and they don't have to worry about plaiting and cutting hair and all that. And that wasn't too long ago. That wasn't 1965, that was 2015, 2016, right? These are issues that's still affecting young people today. And I think one way for that to change is for us to recognize it and bring it more, like do more representation of Black folks, dark skinned folks in the media. And with regards to the LGBTQ community, we see that lighter skinned folk as are more desirable, as seen as more desirable in the LGBTQ community and in the wider community in general as well. And what I want to bring specifically with that is that trans people, because I know there's a lot of young trans persons who are suffering and have to deal with not only just being trans and what the issues that come with that in Caribbean, but also with colorism. Because I know for a fact that trans persons who are lighter skinned are more easily accepted as their gender than those of darker skin. And this is an issue that we have to work out internally for each of us so that we can make our future for the next generation better and brighter.
Okay, and before anyone join in, I mean, in the interest of time, because we're supposed to end at 5:30, I see they have a question and a point in the chat that and now if you want to jump in, you could jump after the question and the point. But the question reads, regarding to the issues of police brutality, racism or discrimination, and classism as lingering effects on post-colonialism, do you have any suggestions for individuals in the position of privilege to initiate change? That's the question. I think and that question is from Nicholas Buckel. And Domani said donors are not used to dealing with small and developing states. This creates a bias towards large multinational organizations. Donors are therefore disinterested in trying new unproven organizations and want to work with established proven ones which have been tested. Worse is the fact that governments in the region support the issuing of resources through them so that the opportunities are concentrated where they send them, shutting out grassroots organizations which development partners find difficult to work with. Due to the large size of the bureaucracy, this is the implementation and capacity deficits in the Caribbean results in more than 60% of development resources in the region remaining unused every year. I think that point is in regards to what Saffiyah and Benedict was speaking about on um, the donors and how they don't want to support you new developing organizations and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if any one of you probably might want to jump on the question and then speak on the points. Yeah.
Then to answer Nicholas's question, how someone with privilege can aid regarding police brutality and other issues, I think what they need to do, those persons who want to help and have privilege and want to use their privilege, is to influence those around you to check their biases and try to incorporate lesser privileged persons into your organization, into your workforce, into your friend group, so you can have a more diverse outlook on things and see where you may have missed out on certain things and who we may have missed out on. Like, for example, in the States, with the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests, we saw not just Black people protesting, we saw a lot of white people protesting alongside of them. White people showed up in abundance and led these protests in the front, facing the police directly, using their privileges to defend Black people, so that Black people can make their point, can push for better treatment by the United States government. The privileged persons should use their privilege, find out how they can use their privilege as like a defense or in support of less privileged persons.
And can I just add to that too? I think that something that somebody with privilege should really be mindful of is to not take the spotlight, but to pass the microphone. So you need to use your privilege to elevate people who are not heard from. Like for instance, I am not a trans person. I can't speak for trans people, but I will use my platform to pass the microphone so that trans people can speak. So I think that because sometimes it's a temptation for people of privilege to take front and center and take the spotlight and to utilize the privilege, and it usually comes from a good place. But I do think that you need to be mindful to not, because you're already, the media is, and the society is already, you already want to hear what you're saying. So you just need to make sure that other people can say what they have to say. And also another thing I would say is to utilize those social networks, because people of privilege have different social networks than other people. And they can utilize these networks to press issues and to challenge their friends and their families and people in power. And yeah, so I think those are two important things, along with what was said, that we can, well, people of privilege can really do to help others.
All right, let me just jump in quick. So I really liked the point that he made, the person that issued the question about the donors, 100% true. So I can't not mention the Queen's Commonwealth Trust, because I feel like I've been doing so much work with them, it would be sad. But it's really something that they've started focusing on in terms of building the capacity of smaller youth-led grassroots organizations. So I mean, it is something, and like you hit the nail on the head, which of course it then is like a cycle. It just goes back around in terms of donors and resources and what that looks like. But at least, just talking to another organization who's been interested in working with youths, and I'll tell anybody on the network, just a quick plug for them. If you are interested, you could just go onto the site and just start getting engaged. And on the other side of it, what we can do now, police brutality is a separate thing and topic. And I think a lot of reform in that aspect needs to happen, like trainings, educational sessions. And I'm really happy that the Spotlight Initiative is currently going on, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to do a lot of good work, especially along the lines of police brutality, not just for men, Black men and women, but also, people of different genders. And migrants and refugees. So a lot of good work could happen there. But on the other end, adding to what everybody said about passing the mic, ensuring that there are people at the table, I would also say ensuring that there's also visibility and people are taking up space. I think one of the things that I myself was shy of a few years ago was taking up space, and we really need to recognize the importance of taking up space as youth, as Caribbean youth in any space that we are, taking up that space, just being present makes 100% of a difference, because you don't know what your voice or the image you're presenting is doing for another person. Just the ability for somebody to see somebody else there does wonders. I mean, I can't take away from anything anybody else said. Excellent point, but I would say just take up space. In terms of police brutality, I think a lot of good work is already happening. I think Womantra is also part of that Spotlight Initiative. If I'm wrong, I could be wrong. And I know a lot of things are happening there, but yeah, taking up space, visibility, passing the mic. We all know what it is. It's just about doing it.
So I'm gonna add on to what all the panelists have already mentioned. When it referring to the question about people with privilege, right? I think that if you are a person that recognizes that you have some privilege, whether that is white privilege, that is light skin privilege, that is what do they call it? Just being able-bodied. It is to look inward and to analyze this privilege and understand how it functions in the structures that exist around you and how it affects other people. I think a lot of the times, as I think Mia would have mentioned, people get into this way of framing things around themselves and becoming the savior, or we're going to save the Black community, or we're going to save the poor. And I think a lot of my activism centers around like empowering people so that they can save themselves. Like, I don't need to tell a Black woman in the Ibiza what she needs. Like, she knows what she needs. She knows better than I know what she needs. So I think changing the way that we try to approach activism in this way is also really beneficial. So yeah, like looking at yourself, thinking about, well, I watched this really incredible video. I wish I could share it. But it talked about white people who are protesting, Black Lives Matter, and giving kudos to them, but also saying like, you need to interrogate whiteness. You need to think about and talk to your family about, why is it that we need to feel superior? Why is it that, why do we function in this way, instead of saying, oh, these poor Black people deserve to live? Like, deal with you will be my boilerplate. And also donate, open your purse, spend your money, put your dollars out there, volunteer where you can, and stay informed. Like, you need to understand things in a historical context, but also like in the current space. So just staying informed and using your understanding of history to contextualize what you see in the media now, because it's not always true or accurate or representative of what is true.
And Saffiyah, since you're there, maybe you could just share your final words or final thoughts on the topic.
Yeah. The one thing I did not prepare was final thoughts. I think what I want to say just to wrap up is, I'm talking to the young people now. I mean, I'm 26, but I'm 27 in a month. So I feel like I'm losing the title of being a youth. But I want to tell the youth that, that they are capable, that their opinions are not just valuable but necessary. It is needed. It is crucial. Like Benedict said, take up space, use your voice, and yeah, do the damn thing. Do the damn thing. All of us here have come from a place where we weren't educated or knowledgeable about all these things, but we got to this place. I think of a lot of my heroes, like Claudia Jones. She's one of my favorites, Black revolutionaries, and I think about that she went to the same school that I went to, which was in City College in Harlem, and how she would have been like a normal person, just like me, going to school and being Caribbean and dealing with these struggles, and then becoming this international figure. So I guess what I'm saying is activism is not for a specific person; it's for everybody, and everybody has their own way to contribute um, to change. So yeah.
Very much, Naya.
All right. So I think what I want to say in closing is that for young people, you have something to contribute, you have something to say that is completely valid and that is a new perspective. And another thing I would like to say is that, it sounds really cliche, but you need to take care of yourself too, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And it's really easy in these kinds of times to get compassion fatigue and to be burnt out and to be numb about issues and then completely close off yourself from them. But you kind of need to, I know it's easy said and done, but find a way to balance all the bad things going on and to see the positives as well. And also to balance your own personal space for yourself. And yeah, I think the key really is just to stay involved in any capacity you can and stay informed. And I think that's about it.
Nicholas.
I just like to thank for having me. I feel really blessed to be able to be around so many intelligent and active activists from around the Caribbean. It's really an honor. I think one last comment I would like to make is just that we have to learn to take care of ourselves and each other. You have to show love to yourself and to one another. And we not even despite how bleak it might seem, Rome wasn't built in a day. Rome wasn't built in a day. Change is gonna happen. It may happen really slowly, but it's gonna happen. And don't not to give up, not to give up. It's going to happen. That's all I have to say.
And Benedict.
Right. I would just say, I don't necessarily want to speak to young people because I don't like thinking about it, but young professionals or just people like me, interrogate everything. Interrogate everything. Every system, interrogate it. Because a lot of times, a lot of the things that we were told, this is how it is not necessarily so. We just, we don't, we're not necessarily questioning the system. And only now I could say in the last couple of years, a lot of us are kind of opening our eyes to different things and realizing more. Interrogate everything. A system is in place. Why are we doing this? Why do women have to do this? Why do men have to do this? Interrogate it. Don't leave anything up for question because it's your life. Is yours, and we are in a space and a time now where we are kind of redefining that space, redefining our space. So interrogated, don't take the old systems that were there as gospel. We could create new ones. We are creating new ones. So interrogate it and then change it.
Okay, thank you guys. And I think to end, what I will say is I see four intelligent and very active young people who still have a lot to offer. And I mean, Saffiyah said you see yourself moving away from, being a youth, but I mean, you still have a long way to go still. And I think, I mean, as young people, we must know when to use lime and when to use honey. We need to know when to like just stand up, let our voices be heard, and fight for what we believe is right. And again, I just want to thank you all for joining in. And I think this is a conversation that we probably could have a part two of, because recent class is so much bigger than what we discussed to here today. I mean, there's still a lot that we could do, and there's still so much that we could discuss on the topic. So again, thank you guys for joining, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. And I hope to see you guys again, and look out for, I mean, the third part of our youth perspective. And bye, and thanks again.
Bye, y'all. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.